Lucas did everything he could to comfort her, telling her that they had plenty of time, that things would work out when the moment was right. Victoria, however, became more withdrawn, her smiles strained, her patience thinning at the smallest inconveniences. Lucas blamed himself, thinking maybe he worked too much, maybe he hadn't given her what she needed. He started coming home earlier, buying her flowers, planning weekend getaways to escape the pressures of city life. Victoria thanked him, hugged him a little tighter, but the distance between them remained. The bedroom that once crackled with warmth and excitement now felt cold and tense. Whenever Lucas reached for her, she would turn away with a sigh, claiming exhaustion or a headache. At first, he tried to reason with her, to talk things through, but their conversations always seemed to spiral into arguments or silent resentment. It was during this difficult time that Trevor became a more frequent guest at their home. He always brought a bottle of wine, a joke to lighten the mood, stories from his travels. Victoria laughed at Trevor's jokes, her eyes sparkling in a way Lucas hadn't seen in months. Lucas didn't suspect a thing at first. Trevor was like family. He trusted him implicitly. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. He could barely breathe, the air around him feeling thick and suffocating. He wanted to burst into the room, to demand answers, to scream at the betrayal that was unfolding before his ears. But he forced himself to stay still, to listen, to gather as much information as possible. He needed to know the extent of their deceit, the depth of their treachery. He needed to understand how he had been so blind, so foolishly trusting. Trevor's voice dropped to a whisper, but Lucas could still make out the words. "We need to stick to the plan. Once you're better, we'll move forward with the divorce. You'll say he was abusive, that he pushed you too hard, that he didn't support your dreams. The courts will side with you, especially with your family's influence. And Reed's security? It'll be mine. I'll take it from him, piece by piece, until there's nothing left." Lucas's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. He could feel the rage building inside him, a hot, searing anger that threatened to consume him. He wanted to hurt them, to make them suffer for the pain they were causing him. But he knew he had to stay calm, to think clearly. He had to outsmart them, to turn their own weapons against them. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper now, but Lucas could still hear the tears in her words. "I just want this to be over. I want to be free. I want to be with you." Trevor's voice softened, filled with a tenderness that made Lucas's stomach churn. "I know, Vic. I know. And we will be. Soon. Very soon." Lucas took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he had to do. He pushed away from the wall and strode down the hallway, his steps echoing loudly in the sterile corridor. He burst into the room, his eyes locked onto Trevor's shocked face. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. Victoria looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. "Lucas, you're here?" she stammered. Trevor stood up, his expression shifting from shock to a forced calm. "Lucas, buddy, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here." Lucas ignored him, his gaze fixed on Victoria. "What did he give you?" he asked, his voice cold and hard. Victoria's eyes flickered to Trevor, then back to Lucas. "Nothing," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just some medicine. I wasn't feeling well." Lucas's eyes narrowed as he turned to Trevor. "You gave her something, didn't you?" he said, his voice a dangerous whisper. Trevor's face flushed, but he held Lucas's gaze. "She was sick," he said. "I just gave her something to help her feel better." Lucas took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "I want to see the bottle," he said. "I want to see what you gave her." Trevor hesitated for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unmarked bottle. "Here," he said, handing it to Lucas. "It's just some herbal stuff, nothing serious." Lucas took the bottle, his eyes never leaving Trevor's face. He popped off the cap and sniffed the contents, his nostrils flaring at the strong, bitter smell. He recognized it instantly, something he had used in his early days of security work, a potent sedative that could be lethal in the wrong hands. He looked back at Trevor, his expression cold and unyielding. "You son of a bitch," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You tried to kill her." Trevor's face paled, but he didn't deny it. "Lucas, you don't understand," he said, his voice pleading. "You have to believe me. I love her. I would never hurt her." Lucas's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Love?" he spat. "This isn't love, Trevor. This is obsession. This is madness." He turned to Victoria, his expression softening slightly. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Lucas," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Lucas reached out, taking her hand in his. "It's okay," he said softly. "We'll get through this. Together." He turned back to Trevor, his expression hardening once more. "But first," he said, his voice cold and unyielding, "we need to have a little chat. About the truth." Lucas pushed past Trevor, his mind racing as he stepped into Victoria's room. Victoria looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears and fear. "Lucas, I'm so sorry," she whispered. Lucas ignored her, his gaze sweeping the room. He spotted her purse on the bedside table and grabbed it, ignoring Diana's warning. He dumped the contents onto the bed, sifting through the usual items: wallet, phone, makeup, and a small notebook. He flipped through the notebook, his eyes scanning the pages filled with dates, times, and descriptions. His heart pounded as he realized what he was looking at. A detailed log of fabricated incidents, each one designed to paint him as an abusive, controlling husband. He looked up at Victoria, his expression cold. "You planned this," he said, his voice a low growl. "You and Trevor, you set me up." Victoria's tears flowed freely, but Lucas saw the defiance in her eyes. "I had to," she said. "You left me no choice. You were destroying me, Lucas. You were making me sick, controlling every aspect of my life. You were ruining me." Lucas's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Ruining you?" he spat. "You're the one who's been lying, cheating, and plotting against me. You're the one who's been trying to destroy my life." Victoria's face flushed with anger. "You don't understand," she yelled. "You never understood. You were too busy with your stupid company, your stupid clients, your stupid life. You didn't care about me. You didn't care about us." Lucas's expression softened slightly, his voice filled with a mix of sadness and anger. "I did care, Victoria," he said. "I cared about you more than anything. But you threw it all away. You threw us away." Trevor stepped into the room, his expression a mix of concern and triumph. "Lucas, you need to leave," he said. "The police will be here any minute. You don't want to make this any worse than it already is." Lucas turned to Trevor, his eyes narrowing. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you?" Trevor's smile was cold and calculating. "I won't deny it," he said. "I've been waiting for a long time." Lucas's hands clenched into fists, but he knew he had to play this carefully. He couldn't let his anger get the best of him, not now, not when everything was on the line. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he had to do. He turned back to Victoria, his expression softening. "I love you, Victoria," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I always have, and I always will. But I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me, who doesn't believe in me, who doesn't love me the way I loved them. Victoria's tears flowed freely, but Lucas saw the resolve in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Lucas," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Lucas nodded, his heart aching with a pain he had never known. He turned and walked out of the room, his steps heavy with the weight of his betrayal. As he stepped into the hallway, he saw the police approaching, their faces grim and determined. He knew he had to be smart, to outmaneuver them, to prove his innocence. He had to fight for his life, for his freedom, for his name, and he would do whatever it took to win. Victoria's eyes filled with tears again, but Lucas could see the fear flickering underneath. He held up the envelope and the recorder. "You made all this up, the photos, the recordings, the fake medical evidence. Why, Victoria? Why would you go this far?" Trevor stepped further into the room, his posture relaxed but his eyes full of triumph. "You just don't get it, do you, Lucas?" he said. "You always had to win. You always had to be one step ahead. But you missed the signs. You missed the way she looked at me, the way I took care of everything for her. You were so obsessed with your job, with being the hero, and you never realized you were the villain in our story." Lucas clenched his jaw, refusing to show the anger boiling inside him. "This won't hold up," he said, his voice steady. "The truth always comes out." And when it does, Trevor cut him off, a sneer on his face. "The truth? No one wants the truth, Lucas. They'll see a grieving wife, a mountain of evidence, a motive, and a history that we've carefully constructed. No one will believe your side, not after what we've put together." Victoria turned her face away, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Lucas looked at her one last time, his own heart breaking. "If you loved me, even a little," he said quietly, "you wouldn't have done this. Not to me." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as the police neared the hospital. Trevor smiled, the victor claiming his prize. Lucas knew he had moments, maybe seconds, before everything changed. Before he would have to fight not only for his freedom, but for the truth itself. The timeline began with Victoria's first visit to Trevor's apartment, a month before they'd met at the charity gala. They'd been lovers long before they'd been friends. Trevor had been the one to suggest using Lucas, to manipulate him into building a life that they could steal. They'd planned every step, from Victoria's fake interest in Lucas to her staged illnesses and injuries. They'd even anticipated Lucas's reaction, knowing he would be too proud, too stubborn to believe the evidence against him. Lucas listened to it all, his expression never changing, his eyes never leaving the screen. He took notes, jotting down dates, times, locations, and names. He cross-referenced the recordings with his own files, finding the digital breadcrumbs they'd left behind. He hacked into Victoria's email account, finding encrypted messages between her and Trevor, detailing their every move. He accessed her phone records, tracing their calls and texts, mapping out their meetings, their lies, their betrayals. By noon, Lucas had a complete dossier on Victoria and Trevor. He had enough evidence to put them both away for a very long time. But he knew that wouldn't be enough. He needed to hit them where it hurt the most, where they'd never see it coming. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. The voice on the other end was gruff, familiar. "Lucas, it's been a while." "I need your help, Jake," Lucas said, his voice steady. "I need to take down a couple of people who thought they could play me, and I need to do it in a way that they'll never see coming." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low chuckle. "Sounds like you've got a story to tell. Let's hear it." Lucas leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the screen. "It's a long one," he said, "but I think you'll enjoy it. And I think you'll be very interested in the part where I tell you how much I'm willing to pay for your help." Jake's laugh was deep, genuine. "I'm listening," he said, "and I think I'm going to like where this is going." Lucas smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "I thought you might," he said. "Now, let me tell you about the game I'm about to play, and how you're going to help me win it." "Fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and anything else you can think of," Lucas replied. "I'll give you the details later." Marcus's voice was serious. "This sounds serious, Lucas." "It is. I'll need full disclosure and access to all your records. You'll have it." Lucas's fifth call was to a man named Samuel, a hacker who operated in the shadows, selling information to the highest bidder. "Samuel, I need you to infiltrate 3 people's digital lives. Emails, social media, private messages, everything. And I need it done without a trace." Samuel's voice was cautious. "This is risky, Lucas." "Very. The price just went up." Lucas didn't hesitate. "Name it." After hanging up, Lucas leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had set the wheels in motion, but he knew he had to stay one step ahead. He couldn't afford to make a mistake, not with so much at stake. He picked up his phone again and dialed another number, this one going to a private investigator he trusted. "I need you to dig into the pasts of 3 people," he said when the investigator answered. "I need to know every secret, every skeleton in the closet, everything they've ever tried to hide." The investigator's voice was professional. "Consider it done." Lucas hung up the phone, his eyes scanning the documents spread out on his desk. He had a plan, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. He would have to be smart, ruthless, and relentless. He would have to outmaneuver them at every turn, anticipating their moves before they made them. He would have to fight dirty, using every weapon at his disposal, and he would have to do it all without getting caught. But Lucas Reed was a man who never backed down from a challenge, and he was a man who always won. He stood up, his resolve hardening. He knew what he had to do. He had to fight for his life, for his freedom, for his name, and he had to do it before it was too late. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, his mind already racing with the next steps. He had to move fast, had to stay ahead of the game. He had to outsmart them, outmaneuver them, outplay them. And he had to do it all without leaving a trace. He had to be meticulous, had to leave no room for error. He had to anticipate every possible outcome and prepare for it. He had to be smarter, more ruthless, and more cunning than they ever imagined. By dawn, he had a plan. He started by calling Tommy. "I need you to set up a meeting," he said. "Somewhere public, somewhere with plenty of witnesses." "Who's the target?" "Trevor. Tell him you have information about Victoria's case, something that could change everything. Tell him you need to see him alone." Tommy's voice was cautious. "This is risky, Lucas. Trevor's not going to trust me." "Make him," Lucas said. "Use whatever leverage you have. Tell him you have proof that Victoria's been lying, that she's been working with someone else. Make him believe that you can clear his name." Tommy sighed. "All right, I'll set it up. But if this goes south, I'm not taking the fall for you." "It won't," Lucas assured him. "Just make the meeting happen." Next, he called Angela. "I need you to create a digital trail," he said. "Make it look like Trevor's been embezzling from his clients. Fake transactions, forged documents, the works. Make it convincing." Angela's voice was hesitant. "Lucas, this is illegal." "I know," he said. "But it's the only way to make this work. Just do it. I'll take the heat if it comes to that." Angela sighed. "Fine. But if this blows up in our faces, I'm denying everything." "It won't," Lucas promised. "Just get it done." Then he called Marcus. "I need a legal strategy," he said. Something that will make Trevor and Victoria look guilty without implicating me. Marcus's voice was serious. Lucas, if you're planning what I think you're planning, you need to be careful. This is a dangerous game. I know, Lucas said, but it's the only way to make them pay. Marcus was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. I'll see what I can do. But you need to be smart about this, Lucas. One wrong move and it could all come crashing down. I know, Lucas said. I won't let that happen. Finally, he called Vincent. I need you to be ready, he said. As soon as the meeting is set, I need you to move in. Vincent's voice was calm. Consider it done. Lucas hung up the phone, his mind racing. He had set the wheels in motion, but he knew he had to stay one step ahead. He had to be ready for anything, had to anticipate every possible outcome. He had to be smart, ruthless, and relentless. He had to outmaneuver them at every turn, anticipating their moves before they made them. He had to fight dirty, using every weapon at his disposal, and he had to do it all without getting caught. But Lucas Reed was a man who never backed down from a challenge, and he was a man who always won. He stood up, his resolve hardening. He knew what he had to do. He had to fight for his life, for his freedom, for his name, and he had to do it before it was too late. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, his mind already racing with the next steps. He had to move fast, had to stay ahead of the game. He had to outsmart them, outmaneuver them, outplay them, and he had to do it all without leaving a trace. He walked out of his office, his steps determined and purposeful. He was a man on a mission, a man with a plan, and he was a man who would stop at nothing to see it through. I need you to bring them in for questioning, Detective. Make it look like routine follow-up. Don't let them know you're onto them. I'll provide you with everything you need to build the case. But you have to move fast. They know I'm onto them and they'll try to cover their tracks. Detective Brennan took a deep breath. All right, Lucas, I'll bring them in. But you need to come in too. We need to talk this through, figure out our next steps. I can't do that, Lucas said. Not yet. I need to stay off the radar until we have enough evidence to make this stick. I'll be in touch, Detective. Lucas hung up the phone, his mind already moving to the next step. He called Tommy. The meeting is set, Tommy said. Trevor's agreed to meet you at the coffee shop on Michigan Avenue at 2 p.m. today. He's bringing security, but I've got eyes on the place. Lucas nodded, his plan falling into place. Good. I need you to make sure they don't leave until I give the signal. I'll have Vincent and his team in place. Once Trevor's in the building, they'll move in. What's the signal? Lucas thought for a moment. A text message. Just the word, go. Got it. Lucas hung up the phone and turned to his computer, pulling up the surveillance feeds from the coffee shop. He watched as Trevor's security team arrived, scanning the area, checking for threats. He knew they were good, but he also knew they weren't good enough. He watched as Trevor arrived, his expression confident, arrogant. He knew he had the upper hand, knew that Lucas was desperate. But he didn't know that Lucas had turned the tables. Lucas watched as Trevor sat down, his eyes scanning the crowd, looking for any sign of danger. But he didn't see the danger that was already in the room, the danger that was closing in around him. Lucas smiled, a cold, calculating smile. He knew what he had to do. He had to outmaneuver them, outsmart them, outplay them. And he had to do it all without leaving a trace. He picked up his phone and dialed Vincent. It's time, he said. The hunt begins. Vincent's voice was calm, confident. Consider it done. Lucas hung up the phone, his eyes never leaving the surveillance feed. He watched as Vincent's team moved into position, their movements silent, precise. He watched as they waited, their eyes on Trevor, their weapons ready, He watched as the moment came. The moment when Trevor would realize that he had been played, that he had been outsmarted, that he had been caught. And he smiled, a smile of satisfaction, of triumph, of justice. Lucas's grip tightened on his equipment, his jaw clenched. He knew he had to act fast. He couldn't let Trevor manipulate Victoria any further. He couldn't let them get away with what they'd done. He took a deep breath. Steeling himself for what he had to do, he activated his communication device, connecting to Vincent and his team. "It's time," he said quietly. "Move in." Through his night vision goggles, he watched as Vincent's team approached the pool house, their movements silent and precise. They were dressed in black, their faces covered, their weapons ready. They moved quickly, efficiently, surrounding the building in seconds. Lucas listened as Trevor and Victoria's voices rose in panic, their words muffled as they realized they were trapped. He watched as Vincent's team breached the door, their weapons raised, their voices commanding, "Freeze! Police!" Lucas smiled, a cold, satisfied smile. He knew he had them. He knew he had won. He watched as Vincent's team secured Trevor and Victoria, their hands cuffed behind their backs, their faces pale with shock and fear. He watched as they were led out of the pool house, their eyes scanning the darkness, looking for any sign of escape. But there was no escape. Not this time. Not ever. Lucas stood up, his body aching from the hours of waiting, of watching, of planning. He knew he had to move fast, had to stay one step ahead. He knew he had to outmaneuver them, outsmart them, outplay them. And he knew he had to do it all without leaving a trace. He walked out of the woods, his steps purposeful, his mind racing. He had to make sure the evidence was secure, had to make sure the money was recovered, had to make sure they paid for what they'd done. He had to make sure justice was served. He walked towards the waiting car, his eyes scanning the darkness, his senses on high alert. He knew he had to be careful, had to be smart, had to be ruthless. He knew he had to be Lucas Reed, and he was. He was a man on a mission, a man with a plan, and he was a man who would stop at nothing to see it through. He got into the car, his mind already moving to the next step. He had to make sure the evidence was secure, had to make sure the money was recovered, had to make sure they paid for what they'd done. He had to make sure justice was served. And he would. He would do whatever it took. He would stop at nothing. He would not fail. He would win. She'd been on edge all day, her nerves frayed from the constant tension and fear. Trevor had been increasingly possessive and controlling, his threats veiled but unmistakable. She knew she was in over her head, but she didn't know how to escape. When she finally showed Trevor the message, he read it, his expression unchanging. He looked up at her, his eyes cold and calculating. "This is perfect," he said. "He's walking right into our trap." Victoria felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew she should be relieved, but all she felt was dread. She knew Lucas, knew his cunning and ruthlessness. She knew he wouldn't make a move unless he had a plan. And she knew that plan would involve her. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Trevor smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "You're going to do exactly what he says," he said. "You're going to meet him at the quarry, alone." Victoria's eyes widened in shock. "But," she started, but Trevor cut her off. "No buts," he said. "This is the only way to end this. You go to the quarry, you listen to whatever he has to say, and then you call me. I'll be nearby, and we'll take care of him together." Victoria felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She knew she should argue, should refuse, but she knew she couldn't. She was trapped, a pawn in Trevor's game, and she had no choice but to play along. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll do it." Trevor's smile widened. "Good girl," he said. "Now go to bed. You need your rest. Tomorrow night we end this." Victoria nodded, her mind racing. She knew she had to do something, had to find a way out of this mess, but she didn't know what. She lay in bed for hours, her mind a whirlwind of fear and doubt. She thought about Lucas, about the life they'd built together, about the love they'd shared. She thought about Trevor, about his lies, his manipulations, his threats. She thought about the choices she'd made, the paths she'd taken, and the consequences she now faced. And she knew she had to make a choice. She had to choose between the man she'd betrayed and the man who was now betraying her. She had to choose between love and fear, between truth and lies, between life and death. And she had to make that choice before it was too late. She closed her eyes, her heart heavy with the weight of her decisions. She knew she had to be strong, had to be brave, had to be smart. She knew she had to outmaneuver them, outsmart them, outplay them, and she knew she had to do it all without leaving a trace. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she had to do. She had to make sure the evidence was secure, had to make sure the money was recovered, had to make sure they paid for what they'd done. She had to make sure justice was served, and she would. She would do whatever it took. She would stop at nothing. She would not fail. She would win. She opened her eyes, her resolve hardening. She knew what she had to do. She had to fight for her life, for her freedom, for her name. And she had to do it before it was too late. She got out of bed, her steps determined and purposeful. She had to make sure the evidence was secure, had to make sure the money was recovered, had to make sure they paid for what they'd done. She had to make sure justice was served. She had to make sure Lucas was safe. And she would. She would do whatever it took. She would stop at nothing. She would not fail. She would win. She walked out of her room, her mind already racing with the next steps. She had to move fast, had to stay ahead of the game. She had to outsmart them, outmaneuver them, outplay them. And she had to do it all without leaving a trace. She walked towards the waiting car, her eyes scanning the darkness, her senses on high alert. She knew she had to be careful, had to be smart, had to be ruthless. She knew she had to be Victoria Reed, and she was. She was a woman on a mission, a woman with a plan, and she was a woman who would stop at nothing to see it through. She got into the car, her mind already moving to the next step. She had to make sure the evidence was secure, had to make sure the money was recovered, had to make sure they paid for what they'd done. She had to make sure justice was served. And she would. She would do whatever it took. She would stop at nothing. She would not fail. She would win. "It's done," Angela replied quietly over the encrypted line. "As soon as she logs in, every transfer routes straight back to you and freezes her assets. If Trevor tries anything, we've got the paper trail to tie every shell company to him." "Perfect," Lucas murmured, eyes trained on the silhouettes moving toward the floodlit center of the quarry. He could see Trevor gripping Victoria's arm tightly, his posture rigid with tension. Robert trailed a few paces behind, phone in hand, surveying the emptiness with a scowl. In the second vehicle, the two unfamiliar men slipped out, their movements practiced and cautious. Lucas's voice was steady in the headset. "Vincent, eyes on the outsiders. Don't move unless I give the signal. We're ghosts until I go loud." "Copy," came Vincent's reply, low and purposeful. Victoria walked nervously toward the circle of light where Lucas was waiting, the pit echoing with every uncertain step. She looked around, her face drawn and pale, glancing over her shoulder at Trevor and the others. Lucas let her approach, arms open, body language calm. He could feel the tension in the air crackling like a summer storm. When she was close enough that their conversation wouldn't carry, Lucas spoke in a low, steady voice. "You really came?" Victoria swallowed. What do you want from me, Lucas? To give you a choice, Lucas replied, keeping his gaze fixed, unwavering. He saw her eyes dart to the shadows beyond him, saw the flicker of fear, as she realized how thoroughly she was surrounded. Admit what you've done. Turn on, Trevor. Help me put this right, and you might save yourself from what's coming next. Or stay with him and see how far he's willing to go. Behind her, Trevor barked a laugh, the sound sharp and cruel. A speech, really, Lucas? You think you're holding all the cards? He approached, the two men from the SUV shadowing his steps. Robert stayed back, uncertainty flickering across his face as the reality of the confrontation set in. Lucas nodded slightly. Take your best shot, Trevor. But remember, there are a lot of witnesses and a lot more evidence than you realize. For a heartbeat, the quarry was silent except for the distant hum of insects. Then, almost as if by signal, everything started to unravel. Trevor hesitated, then pulled out his phone, dialing quickly. He spoke in a low voice, his expression growing darker with each passing second. When he hung up, his face was a mask of fury. "You son of a bitch," he growled. "What did you do?" Lucas smiled coldly. "I took back what's mine, and I made sure you can't touch it. Or her." He nodded toward Victoria, who was watching the exchange with wide, terrified eyes. Trevor's gaze flicked to her, then back to Lucas. "You think this changes anything? You're still facing charges. You're still a fugitive. You're still going to prison." Lucas shrugged. "Maybe, but you won't be there to enjoy it. Because by the time the police get here, you'll be in custody for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. And every piece of evidence that points to me will also point to you, and Victoria, and your father, and Diana." Lucas's voice was steady, unyielding. "You see, I've learned a lot from you, Trevor, about how to plan, how to manipulate, how to cover your tracks. But you made one mistake. You underestimated me. You thought I was just a businessman, just a security expert. But I'm more than that. I'm a survivor, and I always win." Trevor's face twisted in rage. "You think you can beat me? You think you can outsmart me?" Lucas nodded. "I know I can, because I've already done it. You're trapped, Trevor, and there's no way out." Trevor's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Lucas's hand moved to his side, ready to draw his weapon if necessary. But before either of them could make a move, a voice called out from the darkness. "Freeze!" Detective Riley Brennan stepped into the light, his gun drawn and pointed at Trevor. "Lucas Reed, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of your wife, Victoria Reed. You have the right to remain silent." Lucas held up his hands, a smirk on his face. "Detective, I think you've got the wrong man. Trevor here is the one you want. He's the one who tried to kill Victoria. He's the one who's been embezzling money. He's the one who's been planning all of this." Detective Brennan's gaze flicked to Trevor, then back to Lucas. "We'll sort that out at the station. For now, you're both coming with me." Trevor's face was a mask of shock and fury. "You can't do this," he sputtered. "I have rights. I have connections." "I have," Detective Brennan cut him off. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as they have been read to you?" Trevor's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. Victoria, meanwhile, stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Lucas stepped forward, his hands still raised. "Detective, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not the one who tried to kill Victoria. I'm the one who's been trying to protect her." Detective Brennan's expression was unyielding. "We'll sort that out at the station. For now, you're both under arrest." Lucas nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Fair enough, Detective. But I think you'll find that the evidence speaks for itself. And when it does, you'll see that I'm the victim here, not the criminal." With that, Lucas turned and walked toward the waiting police cars, his steps confident and unhurried. Behind him, he could hear Trevor's furious protests and Victoria's soft sobs, but he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew he had won. He knew he had outsmarted them, outmaneuvered them, outplayed them, and he knew that justice would be served. As he got into the back of the police car, he allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. He had done it. He had taken back what was his, and he had made sure that those who had tried to destroy him would pay for their crimes. And as the car pulled away, he knew that he would never be a victim again. He would always be the hunter, never the prey, and he would always win. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, media frenzy, and emotional turmoil. Lucas spent most of that time at the Lake Forest Police Department, answering questions, providing evidence, and ensuring that every loose end was tied up. Detective Brennan had been true to his word, treating Lucas with a mix of professionalism and grudging respect. He'd seen the evidence, heard the recordings, and witnessed the sheer scale of the conspiracy. He knew that Lucas was telling the truth. The media, however, was a different story. Reporters swarmed the station, eager for any scrap of information they could use to sensationalize the story. They painted Lucas as a desperate, violent man, a husband driven to madness by his wife's infidelity. They portrayed Victoria as a victim, a poor woman manipulated by her husband's jealousy and rage, and they portrayed Trevor as a charming, successful businessman, a man who'd been unlucky enough to cross paths with a dangerous criminal. Lucas ignored the media circus, focusing instead on the task at hand. He worked with Marcus, ensuring that every piece of evidence was properly documented and presented. He worked with Angela, tracking down every last penny of the stolen money, and he worked with Vincent, making sure that Trevor and his associates would never see the light of day again. As the hours ticked by, the truth began to emerge. The recordings, the financial documents, the testimonies from Trevor's other victims, all of it painted a clear picture of a man who'd built his life on deceit and manipulation. And as the picture became clearer, the media narrative began to shift. They started to see Lucas not as a violent husband, but as a man who'd been betrayed and manipulated. They started to see Victoria not as a victim, but as a willing participant in a dangerous game. And they started to see Trevor not as a charming businessman, but as a predator who'd preyed on the weak and vulnerable. By the time the 48 hours were up, the story had changed completely. Lucas was no longer the villain, but the hero. He was the man who'd stood up to a dangerous criminal, who'd fought for his life and his freedom, who'd exposed a conspiracy that spanned states and involved some of the most powerful people in the city. And as the media frenzy died down, Lucas found himself standing in the parking lot of the police station, the cool night air washing over him. He felt a sense of exhaustion, of relief, of triumph. He'd done it. He'd outsmarted them, outmaneuvered them, outplayed them. He'd taken back what was his, and he'd made sure that justice was served. But as he stood there, he knew that this was just the beginning. He knew that there would be more battles to fight, more enemies to face, more challenges to overcome. But he also knew that he was ready. He was Lucas Reed, and he would never be a victim again. He got into his car, the engine purring to life as he pulled out of the parking lot. He drove through the quiet streets, his mind racing with the next steps, the next plans, the next battles. He knew he had to be smart, had to be ruthless, had to be relentless. He knew he had to outmaneuver them, outsmart them, outplay them. And he knew he had to do it all without leaving a trace. But he was ready. He was Lucas Reed, and he would not fail. He would win. He drove towards his office, the city lights reflecting off the windshield as he merged onto the highway. The night was dark, but the road ahead was clear, and he was ready to face whatever came his way. As he pulled into the parking garage, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He knew he had to be strong, had to be brave, had to be smart. He knew he had to be Lucas Reed. And he was. He was a man on a mission, a man with a plan, and he was a man who would stop at nothing to see it through. He walked into his office, the familiar scent of leather and polished wood surrounding him. He sat down at his desk, the city sprawling out before him like a battlefield, and he knew that he was ready for war. He was ready to fight, to win, to conquer. He was ready to be Lucas Reed, and he was ready to take back what was his. He was ready to take back his life. He was ready to take back his freedom. He was ready to take back his name, and he was ready to make sure that those who had tried to destroy him would pay for their crimes. He was ready to make sure that justice was served, and he was ready to make sure that he would never be a victim again. He was ready to make sure that he would always be the hunter, never the prey, and he was ready to make sure that he would always, always win. Lucas asked, his voice hard. Detective Brennan shook his head. Some of them went to prison. Others managed to avoid charges but lost everything. A few even took their own lives. Trevor Kaczynski is a monster, Lucas. He preys on vulnerable women, exploits their insecurities, and leaves them to face the wreckage of their lives. Lucas's expression darkened. He needs to pay for what he's done. And he will, Detective Brennan assured him. With this evidence, we can put him away for a very long time. But we need to move fast. We need to secure all the assets, freeze the accounts, and make sure he can't access any of his money. Lucas nodded. I've already started the process. Angela has been working with the FBI to track down every last penny. We'll make sure he doesn't see a dime of it. Detective Brennan looked impressed. You've done more in 48 hours than most people do in 48 days, Lucas. How did you manage all this? Lucas smiled coldly. I had help, and I had motivation. I wasn't about to let them get away with what they'd done. Detective Brennan nodded, understanding in his eyes. All right, Lucas, let's finish this. Let's make sure justice is served. Over the next few hours, the pieces fell into place. The FBI froze Trevor's assets, seizing millions in cash, property, and investments. They arrested his associates, including the 2 men who'd accompanied him to the quarry. They uncovered a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fake identities that Trevor had used to launder his ill-gotten gains. And they found evidence of his plans to disappear, including fake passports, new identities, and a stash of cash hidden in a safe house outside the city. Meanwhile, Victoria was taken into custody, charged with conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. She was held without bail, her assets frozen, her future uncertain. Lucas watched as she was led away in handcuffs, her face pale and drawn. He felt a pang of something like pity, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She'd made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. As the sun set on the second day, Lucas stood in his office, looking out over the city. He'd done it. He'd outsmarted them, outmaneuvered them, outplayed them. He'd taken back what was his, and he'd made sure that justice was served. But he knew that this was just the beginning. He knew that there would be more battles to fight, more enemies to face, more challenges to overcome. But he also knew that he was ready. He was Lucas Reed, and he would never be a victim again. He turned away from the window, his mind already racing with the next steps, the next plans, the next battles. He knew he had to be smart, had to be ruthless, had to be relentless. He knew he had to outmaneuver them, outsmart them, outplay them. And he knew he had to do it all without leaving a trace. But he was ready. He was Lucas Reed, and he would not fail. He would win. He picked up his phone, dialing Marcus. "It's time to start the next phase," he said when Marcus answered. "The legal battle is just beginning, and I want to make sure we're prepared." Marcus's voice was steady and confident. "I've been preparing for this since the moment you walked into my office, Lucas. We'll be ready." Lucas nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good. Because I'm not about to let them get away with this. I'm not about to let them destroy what I've built. I'm not about to let them win. And I'm not about to let them hurt anyone else. I'm Lucas Reed, and I always win." Victoria's attorney reached out first, hoping to mitigate the impending avalanche of charges. She offered to cooperate fully in exchange for leniency. The FBI, recognizing the value of her testimony and the need to dismantle Trevor Kaczynski's entire operation, was willing to deal, but only if Victoria provided everything. Every account password, every private conversation, every method she had learned. Facing decades in prison and with no friends left to protect her, Victoria agreed. Robert and Diana Manning were less fortunate. Their paper trail was clear and damning. Insider knowledge about falsified records and creative accounting left little room for plausible deniability. Their pleas for ignorance and misled intentions fell on deaf ears. The federal prosecutor made it clear: participation in a criminal conspiracy, even under the guise of familial love, would not spare them from the consequences. For Trevor, there would be no plea bargains. His multi-state crimes, and the mountain of evidence from not only the present case but half a dozen devastated families across the country, meant that the only negotiating he would do was over the length of his sentence, not his innocence. It was estimated he would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, disgraced and forgotten by the society he had preyed upon. The story made national headlines. It became a cautionary tale, sparking debates on morning news shows and podcasts about love, betrayal, power, and exploitation. Yet through it all, Lucas refused interviews and book deals. He maintained a quiet, steady presence, focusing on rebuilding his business and repairing the sense of control that had once defined his life. One evening, as the legal dust began to settle, Detective Brennan visited Lucas's office, bringing a manila envelope of final documents. "It's all yours again," Brennan said. "Property, business, reputation, vindicated. How does it feel?" Lucas looked at the city lights beyond his office window. "Like I've woken up from a nightmare," he admitted. "Or maybe a test. Either way, it's done. Justice at last." The months that followed saw Lucas leading Reed Security Solutions through a period of intense growth. Clients who admired his composure and resilience returned, and new ones arrived, drawn by the story of a man who had beaten the odds with intelligence and integrity. Lucas devoted himself to his work with a new sense of purpose, driven not by the need to prove himself, but by the certainty that he'd earned his place through more than success. He'd earned it by surviving the ultimate betrayal and coming out stronger. He knew scars remained, but Lucas Reed understood now that the greatest victories were not won in the absence of adversity, but because of it. And as he returned home at the end of each long day, he did so with his head held high, certain of one truth. He would be nobody's victim, ever again. It was his own freedom, the reclaiming of his life, his name, and his future. Walking out of the courthouse after the final sentencing, Lucas felt lighter than he had in years. The weight of suspicion, accusation, and betrayal had finally lifted, replaced by the certainty that justice had prevailed. He watched from a distance as Victoria was led away in handcuffs, her head bowed, leaving behind a world she had tried so desperately to control. Trevor, for all his bravado, was now just another number in the federal prison system, stripped of both power and mystique. The Mannings had been forced to face the consequences of their blind loyalty and disregard for the truth. As reporters called out questions and camera flashes faded into the chilly Chicago air, Lucas didn't respond. He had no need for another headline, no desire for victory laps or public approval. His victory was more personal, a profound lesson about resilience, boundaries, and the importance of knowing who to trust. He returned to his office at Reed Security Solutions, greeted by his loyal team, those who had stood by him when his world seemed destined to unravel. Together, they rebuilt what had been threatened. Not just a business, but a family of professionals bonded by trust and respect. Months passed. Lucas watched as other scandals overtook his in the headlines, and St. Louis, Chicago, and Denver moved on. His story faded, but its lessons endured. He offered pro bono security consulting for those who found themselves caught in webs of deception and manipulation, quietly ensuring that others might not suffer as he had. One quiet evening, standing at his window as the city lights twinkled to life, Lucas allowed himself a rare smile. He understood that justice was never perfect, nor could any punishment truly undo the hurt of betrayal. But survival, wisdom, and the quiet certainty of one's own worth, those were victories no one could take from him. Lucas Reed had lost nearly everything, but he had found himself. And that, above all, was justice worth fighting for. Then you've lost more than you know, Trevor. Because a man with nothing left to lose has nothing left that anyone can take. The words hung in the air as Trevor was ushered through the heavy doors, his threats echoing empty against the marble walls. As the gallery emptied, Lucas remained seated for a moment, letting the finality of the day settle into his bones. He was no stranger to conflict, but this battle, fought not with fists or gunfire, but with cunning, patience, and a ruthless defense of the truth, had aged him more than any physical scar. Still, he had emerged not just intact, but remade. Outside, photographers captured his exit from the courthouse, but Lucas didn't slow down for the flashes or questions. He walked straight to his waiting car, the city buzzing with the news of the verdict, but, for him, silent and still. As the door closed behind him, the chaos of the court faded, replaced by the quiet certainty that he was finally free. Life slowly returned to normal for Lucas Reed, though normal now had new meaning. Caution colored the edges of his relationships. Trust, once given freely, would now be earned layer by painstaking layer. At Reed Security Solutions, his team became a family forged by fire, bound not just by loyalty, but by shared survival and absolute integrity. Lucas devoted his energy to mentoring younger agents, expanding his company's reach, and quietly supporting those in crisis. A living testament that survival after betrayal was possible if you held on to your sense of self. He spoke rarely about what had happened, believing actions were the greatest proof of resilience. By year's end, Lucas looked out his office window once more, Chicago's lights stretching endlessly beneath him. He had been broken, betrayed, and nearly destroyed, but he had not been beaten. He knew the depth of the shadows humanity could cast, but also the strength it took to step back into the light. Lucas Reed was no longer a victim of trust. He was the master of it. Precise, measured, and earned every single day. And every victory, every lesson, every scar was a silent promise he would never allow himself to be prey again. Lucas built a fortress, not just of walls and technology, but of principles and people who understood that loyalty was sacred and deception unforgivable. His new circle was small but unbreakable, forged in the fires of crisis and tested by betrayals that would have destroyed weaker men. Some nights, Lucas would look across the city from his penthouse, feeling the subtle transformation inside himself. Gone was the man who trusted automatically, who believed that love alone could protect against heartbreak, or that loyalty could be assumed without question. Now, he trusted with eyes open, guarding what he valued with a vigilance that was equal parts wisdom and hard-earned caution. These changes were not the bitterness of a cynic, but the clarity of a survivor. The calls for interviews, documentaries, even book deals never stopped, but Lucas declined them all. He let the story fade from the public consciousness, content for his work and conduct to define his reputation far more powerfully than headlines or sensationalist retellings ever could. On the anniversary of the Quarry showdown, Lucas gathered his core team for a private dinner in the penthouse, a quiet toast marking not just survival, but triumph and renewal. As laughter and voices filled the room, Lucas felt a deep sense of gratitude for the chance to begin again, surrounded by people who had proved themselves time and again. Later that night, as the city lights flickered below and the fog of past betrayals drifted further from memory, Lucas finally surrendered to a sense of peace. He understood now that true security came from within, built by choices, strengthened by adversity, and guarded not just by locks and cameras but by wisdom and experience. Whatever the future held, Lucas Reed knew he could meet it with confidence, resilience, and the certainty that he had forged himself into a man unshakable in the face of deception. He was ready, always, never again the prey, but the unwavering hunter of truth. "I'll handle it," he said finally. "Lucas, you focus on your business. Let me take care of this." Lucas felt a sense of relief. Vincent was one of the few people he trusted implicitly, and his skills were precisely what was needed in this situation. "I appreciate it," Lucas replied. "Just make sure it's handled quietly. I don't want this to become a media circus." Vincent's voice was reassuring. "Consider it done." Lucas hung up the phone, his mind already shifting to the next steps. He knew he had to be prepared for any eventuality, had to ensure that his defenses were impenetrable. He called Angela, asking her to review all his financial transactions for any signs of unusual activity. He called Marcus, instructing him to prepare legal documents that would allow Lucas to act swiftly if necessary. And he called Tommy, ordering him to double the security detail around his office and home. As the days passed, Lucas threw himself into his work, using the distraction as a way to channel his energy and focus. He expanded Reed Security Solutions into new markets, hired additional specialists, and implemented cutting-edge technology to stay ahead of potential threats. Meanwhile, Vincent worked in the shadows, using his network of contacts and his own formidable skills to neutralize the threats before they could materialize. Lucas never asked for details and Vincent never volunteered them. Their arrangement was based on mutual trust and understanding. Lucas knew that Vincent would handle the situation with the same ruthless efficiency that he himself would employ, and he knew that Vincent would do it quietly, efficiently, and without leaving a trace. One evening, several weeks after the initial warning, Vincent called Lucas. "It's done," he said simply. Lucas felt a sense of satisfaction. "Thank you, Vincent, I owe you." Vincent's voice was dismissive. "You don't owe me anything. We're partners. We take care of each other." Lucas nodded, even though Vincent couldn't see him. "That's right," he said. "We do." As he hung up the phone, Lucas felt a sense of closure. The threat had been neutralized, the danger averted. he could focus on building his business, on expanding his influence, on ensuring that he would never again be a victim. He looked out at the city skyline, the lights twinkling like stars against the night sky. He was Lucas Reed, and he was unbreakable. He was a survivor, a warrior, a man who had faced the darkest depths of human betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever, and he would never, ever be a victim again. The bomb squad dismantled the device, a sophisticated IED designed to detonate when Lucas's car entered the garage. The bomber, a local criminal named Jamal Harris, was apprehended trying to flee the scene. Under questioning, he admitted to being hired by an unknown middleman who'd promised him a large sum of money for a simple job. He knew nothing about the target, only that the car's license plate matched the one he'd been given. Lucas reviewed the surveillance footage of the garage, his expression cold and unyielding. "This ends now," he said to Vincent, who stood beside him. "Trevor wants a war, then he'll get one. But it won't be the kind he expects." Vincent nodded, his eyes reflecting the same steely resolve. "I've already put the wheels in motion. Trevor's prison communications are being monitored, but he's clever. He's using coded messages and intermediaries to avoid detection. We need to cut off the head of the snake." Lucas's smile was cold and calculating. "Then, let's make sure he understands that two can play at this game, and I always play to win." Over the next week, Lucas and Vincent orchestrated a series of counterstrikes designed to send a clear message to Trevor and his associates. Vincent's team infiltrated the criminal underworld using a combination of intimidation, bribery, and strategic alliances to turn the tide against Trevor's hired guns. Meanwhile, Lucas worked with Marcus to draft legal documents that would allow him to seize Trevor's remaining assets, leaving the man with nothing but the cold, hard reality of his prison cell. The third attempt on Lucas's life came 10 days after the car bomb, a brutal assault by a team of 3 armed men who ambushed him as he left a business meeting. They were professionals dressed in black, their faces obscured by ski masks. But they were no match for Vincent's security detail, who intercepted the attack before it could begin. The ensuing firefight was swift and brutal, leaving 2 of the assailants dead and the third critically wounded. The survivor, a man named Sergei Koval, was a former Russian Special Forces operative with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Under interrogation, he admitted to being hired by a man he only knew as the boss, who'd promised him a large sum of money for a simple job. He knew nothing about the target, only that the man was a threat to his employer's interests. Lucas watched the interrogation from behind a one-way mirror, his expression unreadable. "This ends now," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "Trevor wants a war, then he'll get one. But it won't be the kind he expects." The next day, Lucas received a message from Trevor, smuggled out of prison through a corrupt guard. It was a single sheet of paper, the words typed in a stark, unemotional font. "You think you've won, Reed. You think you've outsmarted me. But this is just the beginning. You can't hide forever. You can't run forever. Sooner or later, I'll find a way to finish what I started, and when I do, there will be no mercy, no second chances, just the cold, hard reality of your own failure." Lucas read the message, his expression never changing. Then he crumpled the paper and tossed it into the trash. "You're right, Trevor," he said softly. "This is just the beginning. But it's not the beginning you think it is." He turned to Vincent, who stood silently by his side. "It's time to end this once and for all. It's time to make sure Trevor Kaczynski understands that he's playing a game he can't win." Vincent nodded, his eyes reflecting the same cold, unyielding determination. "I've already made the necessary arrangements. It's time to cut off the head of the snake." Lucas smiled, a cold, calculating smile. Then, let's make sure he understands that two can play at this game, and I always play to win. Trevor's eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with curiosity. You're playing some kind of game, Reed. I don't have time for games. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his expression calm and unhurried. This isn't a game, Trevor. It's a business proposition. You've been trying to kill me, and I've been defending myself. But this back and forth is becoming costly and time-consuming. For both of us. Trevor's expression darkened. You think I care about your time or your money? I think you care about your own survival, Lucas replied. And I think you're smart enough to recognize that this war is one you can't win. Not from where you're sitting, at least. Trevor's eyes flashed with anger, but Lucas could see the calculation behind the rage. He was listening, considering the possibilities. Go on, Trevor said, his voice guarded. What's your offer? I propose a truce, Lucas said. A mutually beneficial agreement that ends this conflict once and for all. Trevor's laugh was harsh and bitter. A truce? With you? You must be out of your mind. Not at all, Lucas replied. I'm being pragmatic. You're in prison for the next decade, at least. You have nothing to gain by continuing this feud, and everything to lose. I, on the other hand, have everything to gain by ending it. So, I'm offering you a choice. Stop trying to kill me and I'll make sure you have a comfortable life in here. Better food, better accommodations, access to things that will make your time more bearable. In return, you agree to leave me and mine alone. Forever. Trevor was silent for a long moment, considering the offer. Then he leaned forward, his voice a low growl. And if I refuse? Lucas's smile was cold and unyielding. Then this war continues, and I assure you, Trevor, I will win. I have the resources, the patience, and the ruthlessness to see this through to the end. You, on the other hand, are at my mercy, literally. Trevor's face twisted with hatred, but Lucas could see the resignation in his eyes. He knew he was beaten. Fine, Trevor spat. You win. I'll call off my dogs. But mark my words, Reed, this isn't over. One day I'll be out of here and then you'll be an old man with no money, no power, and no friends, Lucas interrupted. And I'll still be here, stronger and more powerful than ever. So, let's make this clear, Trevor. This is over. You lose. And if you ever try to come after me or mine again, I will end you. Permanently. Trevor's expression was a mix of fury and defeat, but he nodded, acknowledging the inevitable. Fine, he muttered. You have your truce, but don't think this means I forgive you, or that I'll ever stop hating you. Lucas stood up, his expression unreadable. I don't need your forgiveness, Trevor. I just need your silence and your cooperation. And if you give me that, then we have a deal. With that, Lucas turned and walked away, leaving Trevor alone in the visitor room, a broken man in a broken place. As Lucas left the prison, he felt a sense of closure. The war was over, the enemy was defeated, and he was free to move forward with his life, unburdened by the shadows of the past. But he knew that true peace would only come with time, with healing, and with the unwavering vigilance that ensured he would never again be a victim. And choice two? Trevor asked, his voice barely a whisper. Choice two. You agree to leave me and mine alone, forever. You sign a document acknowledging your agreement and understanding of the consequences if you break it. And in return, I'll make sure you have a comfortable life in here. Better food, better accommodations, access to things that will make your time more bearable. But if you ever try to come after me or mine again, I will end you. Permanently. Trevor's mind raced, calculating the odds, assessing the risks. He knew he was beaten, but he also knew that Lucas was offering him a way out. a chance to save face and preserve what little dignity he had left. "Fine," Trevor spat. "You win. I'll sign your damn document. But don't think this means I forgive you, or that I'll ever stop hating you." Lucas's smile was cold and unyielding. "I don't need your forgiveness, Trevor. I just need your silence, and your cooperation. And if you give me that, then we have a deal." Trevor nodded, acknowledging the inevitable. Lucas slid a piece of paper across the shelf, along with a pen. Trevor signed it without reading, his expression a mix of fury and defeat. As he handed the paper back to Lucas, he looked up, his eyes filled with hatred. "This isn't over, Reed. One day I'll be out of here, and then you'll be an old man with no money, no power, and no friends," Lucas interrupted. "And I'll still be here, stronger and more powerful than ever. So, let's make this clear, Trevor. This is over. You lose. And if you ever try to come after me or mine again, I will end you. Permanently." Trevor's expression was a mix of fury and resignation, but he said nothing, knowing that any further argument would be futile. Lucas stood up, his expression unreadable. He turned and walked away, leaving Trevor alone in the visitor room, a broken man in a broken place. As Lucas left the prison, he felt a sense of closure. The war was over. The enemy was defeated. And he was free to move forward with his life, unburdened by the shadows of the past. But he knew that true peace would only come with time, with healing, and with the unwavering vigilance that ensured he would never again be a victim. Over the next few weeks, Lucas worked with Vincent and his team to dismantle the remaining threads of Trevor's network. They identified and neutralized potential threats, ensuring that no one would be able to act on Trevor's behalf in the future. Meanwhile, Lucas focused on rebuilding his business, expanding his influence, and ensuring that he would never again be a victim. He knew that the world was a dangerous place, filled with people who would stop at nothing to achieve their goals, but he also knew that he was a survivor, a warrior, and a man who would stop at nothing to protect what was his. And as he looked out at the city skyline, he knew that he was ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. He was Lucas Reed, and he was unbreakable. He was a survivor, a warrior, a man who had faced the darkest depths of human betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever, and he would never, ever be a victim again. But you lost because all you made was someone you could never defeat, someone who turned your own rules against you, someone you can never threaten, manipulate, or outplay again. Lucas's eyes were hard, unyielding. "Remember that, Trevor. You made this, and now you have to live with it." For a long moment there was silence, broken only by the distant clang of prison gates and the muffled sounds of other lives ruined by greed and violence. Trevor sat slumped, shattered by the unmistakable truth that he was no longer the hunter but the prey, caged by both bars and the specter of a foe he had created. Lucas collected his evidence, pocketed the signed agreement, and left the visiting room without another glance at the man who had nearly destroyed him. Inside, he felt the cold clarity of a man who had survived by burning away every trace of naivete, every comfort of easy trust, every illusion that strength came only from gentleness. As he walked out beneath the razor wire and gray skies, Lucas Reed felt, if not peace, then a hard, earned quiet. He had done what he once thought unthinkable, crossed lines he once believed inviolate. Yet he had survived, rebuilt, and ensured that the darkness that had hunted him would never find purchase in his life again. From that day forward, Lucas lived as a man transformed, not by vengeance but by resolve. He built stronger walls around what mattered, demanded truth and loyalty from those he let close, and never again mistook mercy for weakness. For Lucas, Reed knew what Trevor Kaczynski never would. True strength was forged from pain, tempered by loss, and sharpened by the will to never fall victim again. And with that, the final thread of their twisted battle was cut, leaving Lucas Reed, survivor and sentinel, facing a future that, at last, was truly his own. Lucas nodded, absorbing the report without flinching. The fates of those who had conspired against him were a testament to the iron law he now lived by. Betrayals have a price, and sometimes survival itself is the highest cost. These people had been reduced to shadows of their former selves, divorced from wealth, influence, and each other. Vincent shifted his stance, his voice respectful but direct. "And you, Lucas, you ever regret where this path has taken you?" Lucas looked out over the city, watching the endless grid of light stretching across the night. Regret was a luxury he no longer indulged. "No," he said simply. "Regret is for the naive. I made the world see what I see. Now, nobody comes close to me who hasn't proven themselves 100 ways over. That's not solitude, it's protection." Vincent smiled slightly, understanding better than most the burden and freedom of such a life. "We're ready for your next move, then? The board is set." Lucas took the quarterly folder, his expression cool but certain. "Always, Vincent. I learned from the best, my enemies. Now we make sure no one ever threatens us again." With that, Lucas Reed closed the chapter on his old life for good. Behind him were the ruins of trust, wrecked by those who mistook his kindness for weakness. Ahead was the future he'd claimed through pain, cunning, and strength. The new order he controlled with absolute authority. And as Reed Security Solutions continued to thrive, Lucas was a man remade. Not cold, but unbreakable. Not trusting, but wise. Not a victim, but a sentinel. One who, above all, would never be deceived again. Anyone who threatened his clients, betrayed their trust, or abused their power would find no safe haven once Lucas Reed accepted a case. There were no second chances for predators or conspirators, only consequences, swift and certain. Clients paid for protection and peace of mind, knowing that Lucas and his team would pursue justice without hesitation, and without the constraints that had once allowed his own enemies to flourish. Vincent nodded, his respect deepened by years of shared adversity. "Understood, Lucas. No one crosses the line and escapes unscathed, not on our watch." Lucas glanced once more at the city skyline. His city, safeguarded by the relentless vigilance and hard lessons that had nearly destroyed him, but ultimately forged him anew. In his heart there was no pride in ruthlessness, only grim acceptance that the world could not be saved by acts of faith alone. It required action, resolve, and sometimes a willingness to become the darkness that hunted the monsters in the shadows. As the afternoon sun angled through the glass, Lucas Reed turned back to his desk, ready for the next call, the next threat, the next client whose life or sanity depended on his hard-won wisdom. Outwardly, he was a successful businessman and protector. Inwardly, he was ever vigilant, a hardened survivor who had made an unbreakable vow. Never again would trust blind him to the darkness in others. And as Reed Security Solutions expanded its reach and reputation, Lucas lived by the truth he had earned at such cost. Justice belonged to those willing to fight for it, no matter the shadows they had to cross to bring it home. He offered his clients more than closure. He offered them a shield forged from the same fire that had nearly consumed him. "My team will handle everything," Lucas reassured the trio as they signed the final documents. "You'll be safe, and so will the things and people you care about." Vincent and the core operatives snapped into motion, with each detail planned and executed as precisely as any military campaign. Surveillance teams tracked the CEO's wife and her accomplices, quietly dismantling their web of would-be assassins. For the federal prosecutor, Reed Security provided 24/7 protection, identifying and neutralizing the stalkers until the threats evaporated, and would-be intimidators discovered their own vulnerabilities now lay exposed. In Miami, the business partner who thought himself untouchable awoke to the reality that some debts can't be dodged with clever alibis. Lucas made sure the truth reached the right hands, and justice, as he defined it, was inescapable. Each resolution was efficient, discreet, and final. Lucas's clients slept easier, but so did the man who led them. For the first time, Lucas Reed used the darkness he'd inherited not as a shield, but as a weapon for good, a force to be wielded only when all other avenues failed. He watched his company's influence grow, not from fear alone, but from absolute faith in his word. Lucas understood better than anyone that justice sometimes required more than trust in the system. Sometimes it required ruthlessness seasoned by wisdom, and the willingness to act when no one else would. As dusk settled over the city, Lucas looked out over the lights and felt the weight of what he'd become. Powerful, precise, unyielding. A sentinel for the betrayed, a force for those who refused to be victims. He knew the cost of such transformation, but he also knew, in his own unyielding heart, that the world, and its victims, would always need someone like Lucas Reed. Again in the next tale. But Lucas Reed would not wait for stories to end or new dangers to arise. Each night, he looked over the Chicago skyline with the unwavering focus of a man who had faced the deepest shadows and emerged, not just alive, but unbreakable. No longer a victim of trust, nor simply a survivor, Lucas had transformed into the sentinel his city didn't know it needed. Relentless, vigilant, and terrifying to those who thought themselves above consequences. Where others relied on hope and law, Lucas relied on the certainty of his own resolve, and the hard-won lesson that the only true justice is the kind forged with one's own hands. In every challenge, every new case, and every act of betrayal he uncovered, Lucas Reed became the answer to the question so few dare to ask. Who protects the strong when the world tries to bleed them dry? He did, and he always would. The end.